Hello, this is The Art of Politics. I'm here with my partner, Representative Ken Gidge. Hello, Ken.
How are you?
Good to see you.
And Mr. O'Brien and Mr. Gidge, and we have a guest who...
We do. We have a person who I admire greatly. Carl Seidel came into the legislature during my second term, his first term, and we worked closely together during your first term. And when I went into the speakership the next term, I knew Carl was somebody that I wanted to bring into leadership. I made him the vice chairman of Public Works, where he did just a great job. And so, Carl, I appreciate you coming in. Appreciate your hard work when you were in the legislature.
Oh, it was very interesting work up there.
Oh, it is.
I enjoyed working with you as speaker.
Well, thank you.
Well, Carl has also a TV show, so he's pretty familiar with what we do here, and Carl knows I will beat him up if he gives me a hard time because I have two Republicans here.
Well, we'll have to invite you to the People's Views sometime for
No, they won't. They'll invite you to the People's View. They can't take me.
Well, there's a message in there, but you know, but you know, I had a lot of feedback from last week's show, and they explained how it took 3 Republicans to deal with one Ken Gidge. And you know, I said, no, that can't be the case. But aren't I really admitting it by bringing another Republican in, and it's taken 2 of us. Maybe we're getting a little bit better at it.
For those who are not sure or see the show, you had 3 Republicans who were very outspoken. Okay, it was yourself and 2 others, and I got murdered. I literally got murdered. But I'm glad
you had the best line of the show.
Which was?
When Representative Baldestro asked if he was scaring you, you explained no, he wasn't, but there were some kids and dogs outside.
I just went, thank you.
Very good, Ken, very good.
If that's true. I call him the opera singer, by the way. He sits right behind me. Carl,
yes.
You also were a big deal up at the Hillsborough County and the executive.
And you were on that, and I enjoyed your help when I needed it a couple of times.
Explain that to our audience, exactly what you did up there.
Well, I was chair of the executive council in the county, and that was a surprise when I got elected. I didn't realize that was going to happen. We didn't plan on getting such a supermajority, but it was my turn to be executive chair. And it was a very interesting time we had with the budget and everything.
It was a nightmare.
Well, yes, but it was an interesting nightmare. I don't have nightmares afterwards, but
no, Kirk and Valancourt, that's what I had to...
Well, we have different problems, yes. And that was something. We did have some close votes and didn't always win, but I appreciated your support when I needed it.
And so that was interesting. Just as you know, I was the speaker in the House. The position you're talking about is the speaker for the county delegation, essentially. Right. And most viewers might not understand that. Along with having to go up to Concord and sit in the House, every state representative has an obligation to join what we call the county delegation and become essentially the legislative body for the county they live in. And you know, obviously one of the biggest counties is delegation is Hillsborough, and you were essentially the speaker for that delegation, and that comprised, what, almost a quarter, 20% of the House?
Yeah, it's 100 and some delegates, I believe.
Yeah, so over a quarter of the House. Yeah. So a lot of work.
I think you're right. I don't think people really understand what we do. Some say we're overpaid, but when you take Carl's job besides that, I mean, that's a big deal because that's the finances of, as you said, one of the largest counties. I mean, so you did a great job. But you had most of the Republicans, and you're a Republican. That's why you had a hard time. The only Democrat. I'm not going to start this.
Well, look, you had to be there. There's only 4 of you, I know.
I know. And,
It worked out well that way, didn't it? Oh, sorry, Ken. Let me ask you, as chairman or vice chairman of Public Works, you would have dealt with this concept they call red-listed bridges, and there would have been some efforts to increase the revenue flow into the highway fund. You've obviously been following, I'm sure, because of what you've done in the past in the legislature, the controversy over the $1 billion tax increase that Representative Campbell especially is behind. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, I kind of liked your idea of taking all the increase and putting it into bridges and roads and all things, because there is a long list of them. Maybe not as bad as it appears with the long numbers, the big numbers that were used in this comparison. First of all, that gas tax has been talked about since the first term I was up there, and it was turned down when even the Democrats chaired that committee. So it wasn't thought of as a real thing that we wanted to do to the people in New Hampshire. Second, though, we do have a 10-year plan that we have for correcting all these deficiencies. That is a 10-year plan with 5 years of money. So something has to be balanced. If you're going to have a plan for 10 years, you got to do something like Interstate 93, or some other bridges, like that bridge in Portsmouth that they finally had to take down. I know when we inspected that, I was afraid to get on the bridge just myself, let alone a car. It was in bad shape. It was real bad shape.
Well, sure, and so it seemed logical to me that if you don't have enough money in a fund, the first thing you do is stop the diversions out of the fund.
Definitely.
And indeed, it was logical to Jean Shaheen back in October 1996 when she was asked a question during a gubernatorial debate. I feel so close to her on this particular approach that I'm now calling the amendment the Jean Shaheen anti-diversion amendment, because she's with me on
I've
it.
got to fight this one. Okay.
What are your thoughts on it, Ken?
Oh, I have no thoughts at all. You're going to handle this one. I'll get you later.
Now I see this is the art of politics.
It is. I'm going to move Ken along to the Jean Shaheen, Bill O'Brien anti-diversion amendment, because again, it is. We joke about it, but before you go to folks and you say we need more money in taxes, $1 billion over 8 or 10 years, you ought to make sure that you're using the money that you've been trusted with wisely and honestly. And you don't say we have some red listed bridges, they're all about to fall down, we need more money, when you're taking $160 million every 2 years, which is more money than the new tax would bring in during that period, and sort of slipping it out the back door. And so we want to just get it all together, meet the needs of our highway infrastructure, and if there are other functions that have been funded through this diversion, have them come into the legislature, have them come into the Finance Committee, and make the case just as UNH does, and Health and Human Services does, and so
You have a
forth.
Republican right here who just said, Mr. O'Brien, that there's not enough money. What do? You're saying put back what they have taken, and again, you did yourself to balance the budget, or took a little out yourself. We are a state that is a tourist state. We do need good roads, probably better than most because we're a tourist state. Bridges, I would go and I would agree with you, because what you've said, a lot of these bridges that are, red-lined or red-tagged really aren't that bad. But having said that, we still need money. And my question, I guess, would be to both of you is that if we do that work, will that bring in more tourism, or will it bring them in, make them feel comfortable, want to come back, and maybe bring their businesses because they do need a good infrastructure?
Well, I think that it is needed. What frustrated me about this whole issue was the fact that, what was it, 4 years ago, we had passed the law saying that 73% of it had to go to the highway department.
That's correct.
And then they suspended the law, or whatever they did.
You know,
Yeah,
the constitutional amendment was passed in 1938 that says there essentially is, it didn't quite name it, but essentially set up something called the highway fund. And all gas tax receipts were supposed to go into it, motor vehicle registration receipts, gas tax they called the toll tax because it was probably more palatable. They were even, that was part of the art of politics back before World War II. And what we've been doing since then is raiding it under Republicans and Democrats.
Republicans and Democrats.
It's been bipartisan raiding. And what we're saying now is, if it has become a crisis, and certainly I think fixing our highway infrastructure is important, even if it's not at crisis stage. If it is, we ought to take the money that we put aside and do it, and not send that money elsewhere. Under the Dave Campbell Democrat tax increase, $38 million will come in the first year. If we just stop the diversion, there'll be $80 million for that year that's already been raised in taxes.
Well, first of all, I happen to agree with Dave Campbell. And I've said this to you, we've argued this before. Nobody wants taxes like they want a toothache. Nobody wants a toothache. But I believe, my belief truly is that we probably need better, more so better, because we are a tourist state. And you have to balance the budget. The money's not there to do that. Everybody's trying to move things around, Republicans and Democrats, and it's very, very difficult. It's a difficult time. But are we getting better? Are there more jobs in the state of New Hampshire? Is there more money coming in?
I don't know how they measure it. I don't think they do a good job of that kind of.
That's a good point.
Of evaluating how our budget works. Is it working well? There's always a money pot. You remember on the county budget, we had a reserve fund.
Yes.
Everybody wanted to get their hands on that
Yes.
reserve fund. And how many arguments we had about the reserve fund, whether we should save some to keep in case we really had a recession, or whether we should spend it and not increase the taxes.
But nobody wanted all the reserve fund. I don't want to get into what my pet thing was.
But there was at least a difference of a factor of 2 between minimum and maximum.
Well,
And
how
we're
much is
talking
in
about
reserve
$1 million.
now? When you left, it's got to be...
Well, I think when we left, there was about $8 million still
$8 million.
in there. But that's because we used $4 million. So
And
this year,
I think as a speaker, you did appoint him to a particular good position. He did a real good job.
Oh,
Whether they're
absolutely.
Republican or not,
Absolutely.
it doesn't make any difference.
No,
I mean, this is-
you did do a good job, and,
Yep.
and most significantly for me, we didn't get a gas tax coming out of that committee. We were able to live within our means.
There wouldn't be a gas tax coming out of that committee. Hang on.
That's not been the case, I'm sorry to say, Carl. We need you back.
Yeah, we will. We need him back. We need another Democrat sitting here. You're only being nice to me this week. There's only one.
Yeah, you gotta get one in so you can gang up on me there.
Oh, I will. I'll get 2 in.
Yeah,
I
there you
will.
go.
And I will prep them.
Okay.
Because I am getting in a lot of trouble from Democrats, because I'm getting beaten up.
Oh.
What is in your future? You're taking 2 years off. Are you coming back?
We'll see about that, probably. I mean, I liked it up there. I thought it was really an interesting experience. I never thought I'd ever run, and I found out that I like politics. I started out way back in the 50s as a young Republican, and got active then. But then, married and everything, all the other things that went along with the career that moved me around a little bit. Never got back into politics as much. But then when I retired and my wife passed away, I said, hey, this is a good thing to be. And,
Well, I think we're
I
lucky.
feel-
We're lucky that you did come up there. I mean, you were, though a Republican, you were, I'll say, moderate to a degree, and also helped and would come to Democrats if they needed a vote or they needed something to make sure everybody, and that's what it is about. It really truly is. But it was difficult under your, call it, regime.
Well, when you only have one out of every four members of the House, that does define difficult. But one of the things that I think was Carl's experience is he was on a committee that is more what I call a technical committee, one where issues weren't so much partisan. There were issues
I think probably one of the better committees.
Yeah, where people could come together. You didn't ask, are you Republican or Democrat when you are trying to repair a bridge or find the money to do a bond a project and so forth. Was that your experience? Or?
Yeah, definitely. I think there were, most of our votes were pretty unanimous. There's a lot of stuff that just went on the consent calendar because we all really agreed. I think our biggest discussion when I was there on the committee was when they tried to get the gas tax through way back then. And then it was only because we felt that, everybody felt that New Hampshire couldn't take another tax at that time, even though we hadn't had
Nobody
one for a
needs
while.
a tax at any time.
Well, but you keep on talking about a toothache. You ought to have a decay before you start drilling. That's,
You call a dentist. Extraction.
yeah.
I just had a few a couple weeks ago. That's an experience too.
Yeah, now that you have a perspective of several months of not being up there, what did you think was the best thing about the House and the worst? I'm looking from a point of view of,
Good question.
What would people be surprised as to how well it's operating?
You mean the last 2 years?
Well, just as an institution.
Oh, I think a lot of things work. Some things don't work. Sometimes you wish you could have a gun up there and shoot some of the speakers that get up in the podium.
And I was one today.
These are speakers with a small S, not a big S.
with a
So
small
I want to make that clear.
Yeah. You meant the pop gun or the sport gun, not a real gun.
I think that for the most part, people get along fairly well and can have good discussions without getting, ugly.
Well, I'll tell
Although
you,
I hear there are some committees that aren't run that way.
I must tell you, because you did make the suggestion to Norelli when you became Speaker to sort of intertwine Republicans and Democrats, and she said,
well, she said to me that actually her words were, Bill, please don't do that, we're in the minority. And, it was such a small minority, I didn't want to start off by in any way appearing to be abusive or not respectful to them.
But what is she doing now?
Well, she's done the same thing that I'd suggested,
Yes.
which is to intersperse people with each other. And I thought it was good then. I think it is good now.
It's excellent.
If you're in the minority, it makes things a little bit more difficult to be as cohesive as you might be, but probably if you're in the majority, it does too. But it certainly allows you to meet some folks you otherwise wouldn't and realize that they aren't two-dimensional cutouts, that they're real people.
We talked a great deal about that when the hotel, the Concord Hotel was there. Everybody used to meet.
The Highway Hotel.
Highway Hotel. Everybody used to meet after, congregate, etc. There's none of that. There really isn't. So I think what your idea and what she is doing is getting the Republicans and the Democrats sitting close to each other. Now, to the people out there listening and watching this are probably saying, what does that do? Well, guess what? It's really opposing people who all of a sudden start joking. I have Bill Dezzaro behind me, the opera singer, which I give him a hard time, and he gives me a hard time. And, Republicans, and all of a sudden we're finding that there is just a different mood up there.
You know what I thought about doing for this term if we had gone back in the majority rather, is to seat people by the committees. And so not to have Republican, Democrats, not just to throw sort of people in wildly and wherever you end up, but is really kind of build on the committee structure and actually have a committee sort of generally sit with each other. Because a concern I had when the last term was that you'd have committees work really hard on bills, and those bills wouldn't get their efforts wouldn't get the respect that I thought was their due when it was on the House floor. If Public Works, for example, I think that in the end they work hard on the bills, they know what they are, they ought to stay together and push them. And I think if we start having committee orientation, people in other committees would look at Public Works and say, they're just like us, they work hard in their bills. Or Public Works would look at election law and say, I guess those are the experts in that area. Commerce, for example.
Well,
not entirely. I mean, you come up with a bad result, it's a bad result.
The problem, we'll use commerce as an example, which is banking and insurance. Nobody could figure that all out. I mean, come on. Right now, we're going through the, Obamacare, that changing around. We were talking about this before. It's so chaotic that people are coming in and just saying, look, you do what you want, but this is what's going to happen, so pass something. That's not usually how it goes. But one of the problems that I found when I first got there, my first term, was they put insurance people who are in the insurance business in commerce, banking people who are in banking in commerce. So when banking came in, they got what they wanted. So when insurance came in, they got what they wanted. And then they put people like myself in there who's going, oh, wait a minute, stop. So I hear what you're saying. But the problem, there is a problem there, is you need that call it a loose cannon if you want to stop this.
You do, and there's another part of what you're just talking about is that if you get more than if you get to a critical mass of people who know, or members who know the subject area, like you put a bunch of insurance agents on commerce, or you put a bunch of lawyers on judiciary, then they end up dominating. Their interests end up dominating the committee. And that concerned me quite a bit. Again, one of the things I was going to look at is to try to mix it up. And there's actually another thing here, which is if people spend too much time on a committee, they can still have good philosophy, be very diligent members of the House, but they end up becoming somewhat co-opted by the area agency that they're beginning to regulate. Someone's on education.
That's a very good point. But I don't think that almost could happen in commerce if you're not in insurance or a banker. I mean, I know a lot of people who did a lot for the banking and insurance industry and got, donations for their campaign for the insurance or bank. I got nothing. So that, in a sense, might be good because I'm not taking a side.
Well, you want the consumer to be represented well on all these committees, the one with the outside viewpoint, not a specialist. But you want the specialist to handle some of the details that you
You're absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. Because when we finally agreed on insurance things, there's the tweaking had to be done, which was truly understood.
You want to avoid those unintended consequences, as they say, because a lot of these bills just aren't complete enough.
Right.
That's true. One other thing. Last year, a lot of people would come into the committees and vote one way, and once they got into the caucuses and came out, they'd vote another way. So if you took, I think if a lot of people just took what took place in the committees, how they voted, and then you go out on the floor and they vote differently. That's frustrating.
Why did that happen? I guess I didn't see that, or I wasn't aware of that really happening. I saw some instances, but as a
lot of it.
Really?
Yeah.
Why do you think that is, Ken?
Well, because the speaker was extremely powerful and persuasive. And
but I'd go right into the committees if I thought there was some issues.
And he had a lot of people who were very powerful and persuasive. But I guess that would happen anyway, just probably a little less.
Well, I think you still have to understand that the Republican Party is a mixture of parties, if you will. There's a lot of different people with a little slight different from the Republican platform.
Well, I agree with you. I agree with you on that. I did an interview a few days after the election up at MUR. One of the reporters asked me, should you have reached across the aisle a little bit more? And I said, there's multiple aisles up there, as much as, you're thinking, should you deal with Democrats more? And we certainly tried to. But, there's also within any 300-member caucus divisions that aren't readily apparent that you have to be attentive to.
And I hope people hear 300 because state representatives, I think in Vermont, are 180. 168 in Massachusetts, 180, I think, in Maine, and we have 400. So the Speaker of the House, yourself with what you possessed, and Terry Norelli with what she, it's hard.
Well, it's hard.
It's hard.
It's hard to deal with that many people. Although surprisingly, I came to know who they were fairly quickly, names and all that. That was actually one of my biggest concerns, is that I wouldn't know who was standing up at the well or would get up. And to a large degree, we got to know the names fairly quickly. But the other thing that was fairly hard is that you don't have much staff. You know, I remember talking to Sheila Olivers, who's the speaker down in New Jersey, and I talked to Gordon Fox, who's speaker in Rhode Island. We were saying, you know, how much in the way of staff do you have? And Sheila was saying, oh, gee, I can't remember now. It was like I have 85 people on my staff. And Gordon Fox said, you know, I don't know, like 30-something. And they said, who do you have? How many do you have? And I said, well, I think like 5 or 4.5 or something like that. It's just, you don't have that many.
They'd be shocked.
Yeah, they would be.
And I think New Hampshire, if you want to have 400 people, which I'm not saying we shouldn't, I think we should, but I think the Speaker should have more staff, Republican or Democrat. But somehow we always make it through. We do it, but still, I think the whole system could be a little bit better with a little bit more help.
Yeah. It's hard. I even looking at my Nashua contingent, which was pretty nice, when we had 22 people from Nashua. We sat in 2 rows, most of us, and I could look down there, and I frequently saw different colored lights.
Right.
And that's because that we had some libertarians, we had some free staters, we had some very liberal Republicans. So
well, when you have a caucus within the caucus of the Republican Party, within a caucus, all of a sudden, you know, it's hard. You know, I think we talked about it, herding cats. I mean,
well, I talked about it in terms of herding feral cats, because they'll come at you if you. It's just.
Well, I think we have to get rid of this gentleman. The doorbell went off, and he has to go home and eat.
Yeah. Absolutely. Carl, I really appreciate you coming in. It's just so
good.
Thank you
for having me
Thank
here.
you.
Thank you
Every
very
time
much.
I see you, it's like renewing a friendship.
Oh, well,
appreciate
thank you.
that.
Appreciate
Okay,
that.
this is Ken Gidge. This is Out of Politics. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back in a moment.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Ken Gidge. This is the Out of Politics. We took a break. We're back. Carl Seidel just left us. Mr. O'Brien, isn't Carl really one of the good guys?
He's a gentleman, a hard-working representative. As I had him, you know, contributing to running a very, very difficult committee in terms of workload, dealing with all the bonding of the state and so forth. He was, you know, working hard as chairman of the executive committee in Hillsborough County. You know, people who don't realize what they get for the $100 a year. I'll tell you.
No. The executive, I was an executive, one of the executive members, and I'll tell you, it's awful.
Right.
Awful. And besides what he was doing up at the State House to do this.
Yeah. Now, you know, like you and I, and we both realize it's an honor to be able to represent our constituents, and certainly, you know, it's not nothing that we didn't ask for. But that being said, you know, I talked to somebody like Carl, and I, you know, revisit what his life was like during that term, and I realize that he is a person that we all ought to be proud of.
Yes, he was a quiet, fat. What you see is what you get.
Right.
And he had that easiness about him. But I think what surprised, just on Carl for a moment more, and I think surprised, I mean, he did take, we say he took 2 years off. I know he'll come back. But also what we were talking about earlier was the sort of education we get when we go up there.
Right.
For 2 years. And there was, I believe it was political science teacher at Keene said if you're up there for 2 years, that's practically a master's degree in my field. Mm-hmm. So if you look at it in those terms, in 2 years, we won't, maybe not a master's degree, but in 2 years, you got 4-year education in political science.
You know, another impression I have when I was up there, and it stayed with me, is you meet some of the finest people in the world. You really do. Of all the careers I've had, of all the things I've done, I've met some really good people. But just such a collection of different types, but good people. And maybe it's because what attracts people to a $100-a-year job, which is just basically, in many instances, full-time volunteer work. It's just, I've always been impressed.
Well, we're the only government, and I don't, we've said this before, but I'm not sure people really realize it. We are volunteers. We're the only volunteer government in the United States, all right, and we're the 4th largest governing body in the world. That is a big deal.
You know, I would, as speaker, I would go to conferences around the country, and I'd meet other speakers. And, you know, one of the refrains from some of them, not all of them, I mean, you know, in California, you get paid, what is it, $90,000 a year, $110,000 a year as a state legislator. But, you know, some of them would come to me and say, you know, we're kind of volunteers. And I'd say, well, how does that work? Well, you know, we only get, you know, $12,000 a year, and of course we do get a per diem of $200, $300, something, you know, when we're up there, and we do get expenses and all, and, you know, we just can't live on that, and so we're really volunteers. And then I explained to them what volunteer service really is. And it is a strength, it's a hallmark and a strength of governance in New Hampshire. If we look at all our towns and our cities substantially, every political position, pretty much until you get to the governor's position, is one that is a volunteer position. You know, even these school board members who get paid, you know, $1,500, $2,000 a year, that's way below whatever minimum wage would be.
Yeah.
It's become a tradition. It's a really good tradition. I wouldn't want to lose it.
I agree with you, but I think we were talking earlier, I think the speaker and maybe some of the senators need just a little bit more help, make it a little bit easier. Now, we're not talking about, you know, overlapping. We're not talking about people having time to read books, because you certainly, you know, anybody working in the speaker's office, you don't do that. There's a lot of work there.
There is.
But how can we bring that up and say, you got to spend more money here in New Hampshire?
Well, I think one of the things we have to do, and I, you know, having been speaker and having hoped to get back in as speaker, which I did, and I'd really given a lot of thought to it. And I think the problems that the individual members have to deal with is more substantial than the speaker. The individuals members don't have workspaces. They don't have any staff whatsoever, other than, you know, you have a legislative budget assistant and everything, but very few people do they have that they can turn to for assistance. So I'd given thought about one of the things that we could do, to address that. One is, you know, potentially giving members or loaning them iPads to allow them to access legislation as being debated and access the calendars and so forth. I'd also thought about perhaps looking around in the executive, the State House complex, particularly across the street. There's that state building that isn't really all that intensely used, to see if we could put together some workspaces for representatives. So if they came up and you know, they could go. We have like a computer room now. We do have a coffee room, but
that's not really workspaces.
Yeah, but if more than 10 it's conversation.
Yeah.
But you know, just some spaces that they could go and, you know, get maybe more shared computers space, desk space, you know, an opportunity.
And when they ask for help, they'll get it.
Yeah, a little bit more of that. So clearly, 400 representatives, you know, if we give each person an aide, that gets to be a real expensive proposition. Give each person an office, it's just, you know.
You can't do that.
You couldn't do it. But what you could probably do is recognize that there's a good 15 to 20, depending on what the issue and the time of year is, 25% of the House members that are really quite diligent and could really use some assistance in the way of office. And staff up there, and I was going to see if we could do something.
It's not much money, and what you're saying is so true, and it's always money, but to do that, it really is not much. And as we were talking I'm in commerce, which is banking and insurance. My God, I mean, how could anyone know everything?
Right.
So I would have to stay up there, or in between breaks, 10 minutes or so, if we had bills, run out to try to get some information to come back, and then go through the bills that I've had to go through. It's very difficult, very difficult.
Now, this may sound inconsistent. The other thing I thought about in terms of reform is giving greater consideration for us going to biannual terms again. You know, it really does call on a lot for representatives to have to go up there half a year each year of the term, and I think if we were to limit it just to once every 2 years and make it very unusual to have to come in the second year, unnecessary, I think we'd do better. I think we'd have a lot fewer bills being filed. You know, you've been up there, Ken. You know how many bills we reject. And, you know, now that you've been there, you've been up there 3 terms. This is my 4th term. You know, you sit there, and I've sat in the House floor yesterday thinking, boy, I've seen this one. This is the 4th time I've seen this bill.
Yes.
And it's going to be the 4th time that's being rejected. And so I think there would be a little bit more focus.
I think I will disagree with you on that.
And, I'm not set on it.
No.
I just think that there's some benefits there.
No, I don't think, no matter what we do, because we have so many people, there'll always be
Right.
too many bills.
Right.
And a lot that are foolish.
Right.
There's no question about that. But it's like when you run for the political office, and this time what it cost me to run, and then you get up there for it to be basically 1 year. Okay, well, that's basically what you're saying. Why? Why do it? But, and you talk about having the summer off. You put me on a committee, which I was very happy and thanked you for. It was to study the Liquor Commission.
Right.
Do you know our last meeting was about 3 days after the election?
I do know that.
So I didn't get any break at all.
Yeah, you guys did a lot of work on that. And I want to tell you on that, there are some bills that, and you know this, there's some bills that are coming out of the work you did, which are good bills, that are being heard this time. But, you know, putting that aside, it's just, I think we end up there doing too much in the way of change, too much in the way of handling repetitive bills. And when at times we don't bring honor on ourselves. You know, it's so easy, and maybe I'm just sensitive as a former speaker, it's so easy to demonize what is being done by a majority because there's just silly bills that are filed all the time. You know, the bills that we had last time, and I won't even name them so I don't embarrass
You don't have
members. They're just bills that
And
aren't
I wouldn't
serious.
do it. I wouldn't mention. I personally have got about a dozen that I could say, but
Yeah.
I mean, I won't.
No,
That's just gone.
But there are some important things where you have to put together a budget each cycle. But we can do that. You know, it's a 2-year budget. We have to look at serious problems that will come up in the operation of agencies. We did something very important last term in the way of reorganization of the judiciary. But there's so much that comes up that's just people's whims, or it's just repetitive. And another concern I have is if you think back, maybe you haven't heard this, right after World War II, I can't remember what the number was, but it was like 5 or 6 volumes of our revised statute annotated. That's our laws, the laws we pass. And I think we're up to like 60 or 70 volumes now. If you're constantly passing laws, it gets to the point where people don't know about them, and you have to wonder whether you're doing any good at all.
But, yes, and I think I know what you're saying, but I think what you're trying to do is do everything without money. Okay? Mm-hmm. If we had a little bit more help, I think things would be a little different. For instance, I can go down and I can file any law I want. I mean, any bill. Mm-hmm. Just walk in and say, this is what I want to do. But if there was something within the government for people to say, wait, this is the bill, this will be going to the Speaker's office and or beforehand, or to probably a not form another form of government, but have something right there that we could stop a lot of these. Because a lot of these are really ridiculous.
Now, certainly within, among my colleagues and within the House Republican Alliance, we talk about these issues and we've thought about whether or not there's any mechanism that makes sense and that gives honor to what you're talking about, which is an individual member, spending their time and money and so forth coming up to Concord, but could limit the number of foolish bills. And so we've talked about things like, unless a bill gets at least 2 votes in committee, then it dies in committee. One reform.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I must say, under your watch, one came out of the committee that was 17-0, and the Republicans got it together and passed it.
Sure, and you hear about that all the time.
Which is...
I think we had one this term that was an 18-0 that ended up passing.
That's
happens.
Ridiculous.
It
I'm
happens.
sorry.
Well, it is something is badly wrong when that happens. Either it's wrong in the committee, or the House, again, as I was discussing during the first half of the show, isn't being sufficiently respectful to those who have taken the time to hear the testimony and
That's right.
and consider it. But that is one possible reform.
Well, I agree. If you have, let's say, 20 people in a committee and there's only 2 votes, definitely 1 vote. It's not that it's not going to go on the calendar. It's just going to be on the calendar, and it's not going to be, or it's not even going to make it to the calendar.
Yeah, it just doesn't get out of committee. I mean, we are unusual as a legislative body that every bill gets to the House floor. If you want to file a bill to do the most absurd things, and again, you're thinking about them, I'm thinking about them. Let's not bring individual members, or because then we start talking Republican, Democrat.
Whatever anybody out there is listening can think of something absolutely ridiculous.
We've seen it.
Both Republicans and Democrats have filed this.
Yeah.
A joke.
Yeah, and we've seen it. If you can't, as you're saying, if you can't get the 1 or 2 members in a committee, then it just should die there. We're unusual that everything gets back to the House floor.
How do we change that?
Well, you change it in rules. And you could very easily do it in rules. There's nothing in the Constitution that talks about how the legislature functions in terms of bills moving through the legislature. The argument that we hear against it is the whole theory of Masons is that each member is a representative of every voter in his or her district, and it shows disrespect to those voters not to allow their bill to get forward. And so if you file a silly bill, it's as if 3,300 people who you represent have filed that bill, and we want to be respectful of those people and give it a debate if you want it. I mean,
I think we both agree. We do need, let's say, Masons, but having said that, we are 400 people. Mm-hmm. And I would say there's more individuals, and everyone's an individual, but I mean really individuals up there that sometimes they stay on a reservation and sometimes they're not home at all.
Right.
Now, so there is a point where something can be done, I think. Not that we're going to change Masons, but I think, as you said, within the rules.
Yeah, within the rules, so you can put some sort of an obstacle there. What most people don't realize is there's ways for speakers to kill bills under the rules. Not that I ever did it. I heard about it having been done once. But let me give you an example. I mean, if as a speaker you wanted to, you could just forget to offer a bill on second reading. And it just never gets offered on second reading. It just never comes up. I actually heard that happened about 10 or 15 years ago.
I could tell you what happened in the Senate last time, but I won't. I will tell you off camera what happened.
Yeah, and so maybe there should be more of that. Maybe a speaker should play more of a role of traffic cop and wait for a member to say, you haven't offered my bill on second reading, and the speaker say, I'm not going to, and that member has to get up and convince the House as a whole, because you've been there, those readings that we have, it's very routine.
Yeah.
that's actually the chair, the speaker, offering bills and then assigning them. Yeah, maybe that's another control that could be put in place.
I think what's fascinating is we're sitting here and we're talking about this, and some people might think, well, it doesn't sound like much. It's a big deal.
Well,
Just the two of us sitting here talking about it. You did bring it up, and I am, look, on your side. If it doesn't get one or two people in committee to agree, it should not go on to the calendar. It should stop.
well, it is.
That eliminates the real foolishness.
Yeah, and to your point, it does sound like, and it certainly is a little bit of inside baseball, but for those who care and then they start looking at these bills and saying, why are you doing that? Why are you spending your time? We want you to be up there, in my term, they were a speaker, they're talking about, we want you to concentrate on jobs and the economy, and then, you'd be sitting there and some member would bring up something silly, and people were saying, well, that's not what we elected you for. Well, this is what happens. It'd be very easy as a majority party or even a minority party to just say, take these foolish bills and put them in committee where they'll die. That's what happens in Congress. Most bills never get back to the legislative bodies, either the Senate or the House and Congress. They just, quote, die in committee.
Well, I think the point you just said is we should be thinking about jobs, and we should be thinking about the communities, and we should be attempting to do something. But when we are just filled with foolishness on both sides,
right,
it's so difficult.
Now that being said, let me give you a countervailing argument.
Here we go.
There was a English parliamentarian by the name of William, I think his first name was William Wilberforce. He was the first member of Parliament to file a bill to outlaw slavery in the British Empire. And he was subject to a lot of harsh criticism when he first did that, had no support to speak of, even though he was a friend of William Pitt. He was a connected guy, Wilberforce was. But he had to do it for 30 years. And that bill would have died in committee.
Yes.
And so maybe, it takes a long time for the ridiculous to become the inevitable.
Well, if you would like the ridiculous regarding slavery, I think it was Alabama that just went with the Constitution and forbid slavery in Alabama. Mm. And it was, I think, 1990, they kept bringing it up. In 1990, they brought it up, and I believe it was the Secretary of State had to do some paperwork and didn't do the paperwork.
Ken, don't we have a bill this time in the House that is supposed to respond to some petition that was filed before the Civil War by some African Americans in Portsmouth? And I guess the petition was either denied or ignored or something like that. And the petition now, I guess there's some legislation to respond to the petition by, I don't know, apologizing for the slavery or freeing them. I mean, I think it was freeing them, because I looked at it and I thought, this is a particularly offensive resolution, because yeah. I can't look at another person or even a historical figure and say, I have any right to tell you you're not property or to free you. You are naturally free, just because our great and grandfathers and grandmothers said you were property doesn't make you that, and doesn't allow me to say that you aren't. I have no control over you. I don't know if you come across that.
No, I haven't, but we've come a long way. Things have changed. I mean, we have a black president, which I never thought in my lifetime it would ever happen. And I really wasn't too sure he was going to get reelected, but boy, this guy's smart.
You were apparently less optimistic than I was, because I was optimistic it would happen in my lifetime. My sixth grade teacher, I remember, was a black man, Mr. Miller, and he was such an impressive individual. I still remember him, very, very dignified and knowledgeable. There's a lot of folks out there of all races like him, but I knew somebody like him would come forward.
Well, I can understand that. I wasn't not believing that there is someone extremely bright. But when you have racism, which is, really in a sense nothing to do with politics, I really thought there was too much in this country. I really didn't think the first time.
I don't think so. I think I don't think that there are racists around, but you and I are getting to be older people now, Ken, and I think in our generation, it became something that was just awful, and so certainly among younger people, I think there's a recognition that racism is something that is just an awful, awful thing.
Well, I always tell the story. I mean, I wasn't in the 60s marching in Selma or et cetera, but I did march in Boston when the busing took place. We're walking down Commonwealth Avenue, and I was on the edge, and 4 white guys pulled me out, beat the hell out of me. And the black guys sort of surrounded them. It was nonviolent. They got me to the middle, and they said, "What are you doing? You shouldn't be. You should be in the middle of us." So, racism does exist.
And as I said, we're getting to be older guys
We
now
are.
because
That was a long time
you're
ago.
talking 40, 50 years ago.
We're not talking that long, but
well, the busing crisis was in the 1970s.
that's right.
In Boston, it was 74,
That's right.
77, somewhere around
I
there.
was in Boston, I think, on late '65, and stayed there right up till 1970. Well, our time is over, and you keep saying that what are we going to talk about? What we talked about is we did talk with Carl, but I think what we talked about is something really, really important that not only was probably on your mind and my mind, but something I think the listeners out there should hear about our government. And no matter what we say is, we wouldn't change it, we would tweak it.
No, it works well. It's a volunteer government. It's something for us to be very proud of.
You're very, as you said,
And
extremely honorable.
When I would go to these conferences of speakers, I would be proud to say I'm from New Hampshire.
On that note, would you like to give your email address or?
Sure. My email address is my name, William L. O'Brien, no punctuation, no apostrophe, @gmail.com. And get in touch with me. I'd love to hear from you.
You're on Facebook?
I am on Facebook, and I use my actual name there too. So, become my friend.
Yeah, befriend us. I am also on Facebook. My name is Ken Gidge. I also have Gidge World, which is an art website. My email address is kgidge, that's Kgidge, @AOL.com. My cell is 603-864-9332. And on that note.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.